They say blood is thicker than water. But in my family, it turns out ink is thicker than both. One signature, one sentence in my aunt's will, and my entire world was set on fire. Honestly, I never thought I'd be telling this story to anyone. I'm an architect. I build things that are solid, logical. I deal in facts, not messy emotions. But then I realized stories like this, they're not just about money or betrayal. They're about fighting back when someone tries to erase you. If you know what that feels like, maybe you'll stick around for this. Subscribe to the channel. Sometimes you find the blueprint for your own battle in the stories of strangers. The lawyer's office in Boston was exactly what you'd expect. It smelled like old paper and lemon polish, a scent that always reminded me of my Aunt Alina, a little bit of class covering up a whole lot of dust. I sat on a stiff, leather chair that complained every time I moved, and I looked at the faces around me. A few distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, and of course, my cousin Mark, perched on the edge of his seat like an eager bird waiting for a worm. My Aunt Alina was formidable, the matriarch of our family with a grip as tight as the pearls she always wore. We had a strange relationship. I think she respected my success, my refusal to take a handout, the fact that I built my own architectural firm from nothing. But she also resented it. She wanted devotion, the kind that came with weekly visits and endless flattery. The kind my cousin Mark was an expert at providing. I gave her respect, he gave her adoration. I always thought she was smart enough to know the difference. That was my first mistake. I wasn't expecting much from the will. A piece of jewelry, maybe a small sum of money left out of a sense of familial obligation. I was there to pay my final respects and get on with my life. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Albright who looked like he'd been born in a three-piece suit, finally cleared his throat and began to read. He droned on about bequests to charities and paid-off staff. I could see Mark practically vibrating with anticipation. Then Albright got to the main event. "To my dear nephew, Mark Jennings," he read, his voice gaining a bit of warmth, "who has been a constant comfort and a source of unwavering devotion in my final years, a son to me in all but name." I almost rolled my eyes. Mark was laying it on thick, as usual, even from the grave. "I bequeath the entirety of my estate. This includes the family brownstone on Beacon Street, all personal effects therein, and the full balance of my investment portfolio." The room was silent, the entire estate. Millions. I was genuinely shocked, but not for me, for her. Alina was a sharp woman. To leave everything to a sycophant like Mark, it didn't make sense. But I kept my face a perfect mask of neutrality. It was her money, her choice. But then Mr. Albright turned a page and continued. "As for my niece, Cynthia Adams." He paused, and in that moment, I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. He wasn't just reading a bequest. He was preparing to deliver a blow. "As for my niece, Cynthia Adams," he repeated, his voice now flat and clinical, "whose troubling independence and ungrateful nature have been a constant source of disappointment to this family, I leave her nothing but the hope that she may one day understand the value of loyalty." Nothing, the word didn't just register, it detonated. It wasn't the lack of money. I had my own. It was the public execution. The carefully chosen words designed to humiliate me in front of everyone, troubling independence, ungrateful nature. It was a punishment for not being Mark, for not being a flatterer, for building my own life instead of orbiting hers. I could feel the other cousins shifting in their seats, their eyes burning into the side of my head. I didn't dare look at them. I just stared straight ahead at a dusty painting of a ship on the wall, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. The shock was a white-hot flash, followed by a wave of cold, clarifying rage. This wasn't my aunt, not the woman I knew. The words were hers, maybe, but the sentiment, the poison, that was someone else's. The reading concluded. People started murmuring, shuffling their papers. I finally allowed myself to look at Mark. He was looking right at me, his face a perfect, practiced mask of sadness and pity. But his eyes were shining with a triumphant glee he couldn't quite hide. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just my aunt's final, cruel judgment. This was his victory lap, and I had no idea the race had even started. The lawyer's voice faded, but the words ungrateful and shame hung in the air, sharp as glass. Mark's pitying look felt like acid. I had to get out of there. I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping harshly against the polished floor. I didn't look at anyone, not at the cousins who were now whispering behind their hand. Nor at the lawyer who was already tidying his papers, his part in the drama complete. I definitely didn't look at Mark. I just turned and walked out, my back straight, my heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the marble floor of the lobby. The Boston air was thick and humid, but it felt like a relief after the suffocating atmosphere of that office. I walked without any destination in mind, my feet carrying me past the old brick buildings and the bustling crowds of downtown Crossing. My mind, usually so orderly, so logical, was a chaotic storm of replay, troubling independence. What did that even mean? To my Aunt Alina, it meant I didn't marry the man she picked out for me. It meant I started my own firm instead of taking a respectable job. It meant I bought my own apartment instead of living off the family's name and money. To me, it was just my life. Ungrateful nature. Was I ungrateful because I didn't call her every single day like Mark did? Was I ungrateful because I spent my holidays working on a deadline for a project that would build my future, instead of sitting at her stuffy dinner table listening to the same old stories? I mean, honestly, I always thought she respected my drive. I thought she saw a bit of her own stubborn will in me. But the will, that hateful, carefully crafted document, told a different story. It said my entire life had been a disappointment to her. When I got back to my apartment, my clean, modern, minimalist space that was the absolute opposite of Alina's cluttered brownstone, the anger was still there, hot and sharp, but confusion was starting to seep in. There had to be more to it. I picked up my phone and called Mark, straight to voicemail. "Mark, it's Cynthia," I said, my voice tight but even. "I was hoping we could talk. I want to understand. Please call me back." I sent a text. "We need to talk." I watched the screen. The single gray checkmark turned into two blue ones. Delivered, read, and then nothing. No reply. The silence on the other end of the line was louder than any insult. He had what he wanted. He didn't need to pretend anymore. The next day, the isolation began. I got a text from a distant cousin, Susan, someone I'd always been friendly with at Christmas. "Heard about the will, Cyn. So sorry. But you know how Alina could be. It's probably for the best to just let it go. Don't make waves." Don't make waves. I stared at the message, the polite, cowardly words of someone choosing the side of the money. They were all falling in line, accepting this bizarre, cruel narrative that I was some kind of family disgrace. They were erasing me, and they were doing it with sympathetic text messages. The hurt from that was sharp, but it acted like a whetstone for my anger. The confusion started to burn away, leaving something hard and clear in its place. This wasn't just a dying woman's last bitter words. This had been a campaign. Mark's constant presence, the little whispers, the concerns he must have shared with Alina about my troubling life, it all came into focus. He hadn't just been a devoted nephew. He'd been a poison, dripping slowly into her ear for years, isolating her and turning her against the one person in the family who didn't need anything from her. I paced my living room, the city lights twinkling outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked at the architectural awards on my shelf. I looked at the blueprints for the new library I was designing. I had built this life with my own two hands. My independence wasn't troubling. It was my greatest creation. And I would not let that sniveling, sycophantic cousin and his years of quiet lies be the final word on my character. He had miscalculated. He thought I would be too proud or too hurt to fight back. He thought I'd just walk away. He didn't know me at all. I sat down at my desk, my anger now focused into a single, sharp point. This wasn't a family matter anymore. This was a legal one. I opened my laptop, the glow illuminating my face in the dark room, and typed 5 words into the search bar. Best probate litigation attorney, Boston. The screen filled with names. I scrolled through them, found one with a reputation for being a bulldog, and I picked up the phone. As I heard the dial tone buzz in my ear, I knew exactly what I was doing. This wasn't just a phone call. It was a declaration of war. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a sound of grim purpose. I wasn't just calling a lawyer. I was recruiting a general for the war I was about to declare on my own family. Her name was Helen Davies, and she had a reputation for being the sharpest probate litigator in Boston. Our first meeting took place in her sparse, modern office, a space I appreciated for its lack of clutter and sentimentality. She didn't offer me tea or platitudes. She offered me the cold, hard truth. "Contesting a will is an uphill battle, Cynthia," she said, her eyes sharp and intelligent behind stylish, black-rimmed glasses. "The court gives immense weight to the deceased's written words. It's not enough to prove the will is unfair. You have to prove it's invalid. That means we have to demonstrate either that a liener was not of sound mind when she signed it, or that she was under what the law calls undue influence." Undue influence. The phrase hung in the air. It was the perfect legal term for the sick feeling I had in the pit of my stomach. "He poisoned her against me," I said simply. "That's what we have to prove," she replied, not missing a beat. "And the burden of proof is entirely on us. It will be expensive, it will be invasive, and it will be emotionally brutal. Are you prepared for that?" I looked out her window at the Boston skyline, at the buildings I had helped design, solid structures of steel and glass. I had never run from a fight in my life. "I am," I said. The first step felt like launching a missile. Ms. Davies filed the official challenge to the will in court. A flurry of legal notices were sent out to every party involved. The polite family schism was now a formal, public war. The reaction from Mark's side was swift and vicious. His lawyers from a big, old-money firm filed a motion to dismiss our case. Reading their response was like reading my own obituary, written by my worst enemy. It was, honestly, a work of fiction. They painted me as a distant and opportunistic relative who, upon learning of her aunt's death, was now preying on the family's grief for personal enrichment. They claimed I had been effectively estranged from a liener for the better part of a decade, and that my lawsuit was a frivolous and vindictive act against the nephew who had selflessly cared for her in her final years. Lie after lie, all wrapped up in the elegant, cutting language of the law. The emotional toll was immediate and heavy. It's one thing to be insulted by a dead relative. It's another thing to see your character, your life's work, your very identity, systematically dismantled and twisted into something ugly on a public court document. Then came the discovery process, the part where both sides are legally required to hand over any relevant information. It was an invasion. They demanded years of my financial records, my phone bills, my emails. They were looking for anything, any shred of evidence to support their narrative that I was greedy and desperate. And in turn, we had to demand the same from them. Alina's medical records, her financial statements, Mark's communications. I spent a week in a windowless room with a paralegal, sifting through boxes of my own life, the details of it feeling foreign and strange under the cold, legal spotlight. I felt exposed, violated. This was their strategy. Ms. Davies explained to me one night as we sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of binders. "They want to bury us in paperwork," she said, gesturing to the mountains of paper. "They want to make this so expensive and so emotionally draining that you just give up. They're betting that you'll quit before we find anything." I looked at the boxes, at the thousands of pages representing thousands of dollars in legal fees, and a wave of exhaustion washed over me. Was this even worth it? To bankrupt myself emotionally and financially just to fight a ghost and a liar? Ms. Davies must have seen the doubt on my face. She leaned forward. "They can throw all the paper they want at us, Cynthia. It's a smokescreen. It won't change the truth. To win this, we just need one thing they don't have: proof. Something tangible that shows your aunt's true state of mind, something that proves Mark was pulling the strings. We find that, she said, tapping a thick binder, and all of this becomes a footnote. Her words cut through my fatigue. She was right. This wasn't about the noise and the paper. It was about finding a single, clear signal of truth. The architect in me understood that. You can have 1,000 bad designs, but all you need is one good one to build from. I looked at the mountain of documents no longer as an obstacle, but as a landscape I had to excavate. The proof was in there somewhere, and I resolved right then that I would find it, no matter what it took. Proof, I thought, as I stood on the grand, creaking staircase of my aunt's house a week later. How do you find proof of a lie that's been whispered for years? I was back in the Beacon Hill brownstone, but it felt nothing like the home I had known. It was now officially the estate of Eleanor Vance, a legal battlefield. Mark wasn't there, but his lawyer was, a junior associate who looked about 12 years old and whose only job was to follow me from room to ensure I didn't pocket any of the contested silverware. The whole experience was clinical and humiliating. My official purpose, as outlined in a curt legal letter, was to retrieve personal effects of no significant monetary value. I mean, honestly, the arrogance was breathtaking. I was there to collect Why own history? Boxes of my childhood photos, school projects my aunt had insisted on keeping, a few specific books she had promised me years ago. The things that made up a life, not a balance sheet. The attic is the last place, I told the junior lawyer, who had been trailing me with all the personality of a lamppost. My things should be in a trunk labeled with my name. He nodded, clipboard in hand. I led the way up the narrow, winding stairs to the top floor. The attic smelled of cedar, dust, and time. Motes of dust danced in the single beam of light from a dormer window. It was a museum of forgotten things. Old furniture draped in white sheets like sleeping giants, stacks of forgotten paintings, and in the corner, a large, black steamer trunk with the initials, CA, stenciled on the side. My trunk. I knelt and unlatched it. The scent of my own youth rushed out, old paper and dried flowers. I pulled out a few items, the lawyer watching me silently. A photograph of me at age 10 on the Cape, squinting into the sun. A horribly misshapen clay pot I had made for Eleanor in a summer camp pottery class. A wave of genuine, uncomplicated grief washed over me. This was the aunt I remembered, the one who, beneath her controlling exterior, had saved every silly thing I'd ever given her. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Was I desecrating these memories by turning our family into a court case? As I lifted a stack of my old yearbooks out of the trunk, I had to shift it slightly to get a better grip. Behind it, pushed deep into the eaves and covered by a dusty canvas sheet, was something else. A simple, unassuming cardboard box. It would have been completely missable, except for the 2 words written on the side in my aunt's elegant, familiar script. Letters private. My heart gave a jolt. That's not on the approved list, the lawyer bot said from behind me. It could contain my own letters to my aunt, I said, not looking at him, my voice sharper than I intended. That would make them my personal effects. I'm taking it to be reviewed. I didn't wait for an argument. I pulled the box out. It was heavy, heavier than it looked. I put the lid back on my trunk, hoisted the cardboard box into my arms, and stood up. I'm finished here, I said. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. The box sat on the passenger seat beside me like a silent passenger, a time capsule holding God knows what. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of clean lines and quiet order, felt tense and cluttered with the box sitting in the middle of the living room floor. It was a piece of that dusty, complicated past, an invader in my carefully constructed present. For an hour, I just looked at it. It represented a violation of my aunt's privacy, but it could also be my only path to the truth. The hope that an answer lay inside was at war with the dread of what that answer might be. Finally, I couldn't wait any longer. I knelt on the floor, took a knife from the kitchen, and slit the old packing tape. The flaps fell open. It was filled to the brim with bundles of letters, each tied with a faded, colored ribbon. Red, blue, green, yellow, decades of correspondence. A lifetime of secrets and conversations. My hands trembled slightly as I reached in and lifted out the first bundle, the one on top, tied with a simple, pale blue ribbon. It felt fragile, like holding a bird's nest. With a deep breath, I began to untie the knot. I spent the next 3 nights surrounded by the ghosts of my family's past, the scent of old paper and dried ink filling my apartment. I read letter after letter, searching for an answer. My architectural projects were forgotten. My phone went unanswered. My world shrank to the contents of that dusty cardboard box. The first few bundles were a journey through time. Letters from the 60s and 70s, written on thin, elegant stationery, full of family gossip, discussions of art, and complaints about the Boston winters. I saw my own name mentioned as a child, a teenager, a young woman starting her career. In her own words, Alina was proud, if a bit critical. There was no poison here, just the normal, complicated texture of family. I started to feel a creeping sense of hopelessness. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she really had just decided I was a disappointment. Then I got to the last bundle, tied with a simple black ribbon. The letters were from the last 2 years of her life. The handwriting was noticeably less firm. I started reading through them. The first few were normal enough, thank you notes for flowers, replies to invitations. But then I found it. A small stack of envelopes, maybe 10 of them, all addressed to a Mrs. Martha Gable. Martha had been my aunt's dearest friend since childhood. She had passed away almost 3 years ago. I looked at the postmark dates on the letters. They were all from the last year and a half. They were letters to a dead woman. They had never been sent. With a feeling of cold dread, I realized. This wasn't correspondence. It was a diary. I carefully unfolded the first one. "Dearest Martha," it began, "I wish you were here to talk to. Mark is so wonderfully devoted, he comes by every single day now. It's a comfort, truly. He says it's a shame Cynthia is so consumed by her firm that she can't find the time to visit her old aunt. I tell him she's a busy woman, building her own life, but he just shakes his head and says family ought to come first. I suppose he's right. It does sting a little." I had to put the letter down. I remembered that period. I had been working on the biggest project of my career, the new wing of the art museum. I had called Alina every week, just as I always had. But my visits had been less frequent, it was true. Mark had taken that fact and twisted it into a weapon of neglect. I picked up the next letter, dated a month later. "Something terribly odd today, Martha. Mark was helping me organize my jewelry box, and he noticed that Mother's silver locket is missing. He was so very upset. He searched the whole room for me. He gently suggested that Cynthia might have. Borrowed it on her last visit a few weeks ago. He said she has expensive taste. I told him that was a monstrous thing to say, that Cynthia would never steal. But the thought, once planted, it's a dreadful, thorny thing, isn't it?" My blood ran cold. The locket was in my own jewelry box. Alina had given it to me herself on my 40th birthday. Mark knew that. He had been there. He had deliberately planted the idea in her head that I was a thief. I read on, my horror growing with each page. Letter after letter painted the same insidious picture. Mark was a constant presence, his help becoming a suffocating blanket of control. He told her she was getting forgetful. He began helping with her mail, her phone calls. He told her stories, that I had been rude to a family friend, that I was selling off other small heirlooms, that I thought her traditional values were a joke. Each one was a small, poisonous drop, slowly turning my aunt against me. "I feel so isolated, Martha. Mark says it's for my own good, to protect me from stress. He's so very protective." The sadness I felt was immense and suffocating. My aunt hadn't been a cruel woman who disinherited her niece out of spite. She had been a victim, an elderly, isolated woman who was being psychologically manipulated by the one person she thought she could trust. My fight was no longer just for myself. It was for her. I finally came to the last letter in the stack. The handwriting was a shaky, almost illegible scrawl. It was dated 1 week before she signed the new will. "Martha," it began with no salutation. "He is here again. He is always here now. The house doesn't feel like my own. He says I must be strong and protect the family from Cynthia's greed. He says she will take everything and destroy your father's legacy. He is bringing his lawyer tomorrow, a Mr. Hayes, to help me fix the will and make sure everything is safe. But Martha, sometimes I feel like a prisoner in my own home." There it was, the smoking gun, the direct link between his influence, his lies, and the creation of that hateful document. He hadn't just influenced her feelings, he had orchestrated the entire legal process. I leaned back, the letters spread out around me on the floor. The search was over. My heart ached for the confused, frightened woman who had written these words. The aunt I could have helped if I hadn't been so blind. The profound sadness was still there, but beneath it was the cold, hard certainty of a case that had just been won. I closed my eyes, the fragile paper in my hand feeling as solid and heavy as a slab of granite. The truth. I finally had the truth. A prisoner in my own home. My aunt's words gave me all the strength I needed. The time for defense was over. It was time to attack. A deposition is not a courtroom drama. There's no judge, no jury. It's just a sterile conference room with a long, polished table and a court reporter silently tapping away in the corner. But in that room, the war is often won or lost. I sat beside my lawyer, Helen Davies, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Across the table sat my cousin Mark, looking confident and somber in a dark suit, his own expensive lawyer beside him. Ms. Davies began, her voice calm and methodical. "Mr. Jennings, could you please describe for the record your relationship with your late aunt, Eleanor Vance?" Mark leaned into the microphone, his face a perfect mask of grieving devotion. "My Aunt Eleanor was more like a mother to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Especially in her final years. I considered it my honor, my duty to be there for her. I would visit every day, help with her correspondence, make sure she wasn't lonely." He painted a beautiful picture of selfless care. Honestly, if I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him myself. "And your cousin, Cynthia Adams?" Ms. Davies asked H. Her tone unchanging. "What was your relationship with her like?" Mark sighed, a theatrical, sorrowful sound. "It was a shame," he said, shaking his head. "Cynthia is very ambitious, very busy with her career. She was always quite distant from the family. Aunt Eleanor worried about her, of course, wished she would visit more, but Cynthia chose her own path." "Did you ever speak ill of your cousin to your aunt?" "Oh, heavens no," Mark said, looking genuinely shocked at the suggestion. "Never. I always encouraged Eleanor to reach out to her. I told her Cynthia loved her in her own way. Family is family, after all." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. I felt a cold knot of fury tighten in my stomach, but I kept my face impassive. I trusted Ms. Davies. I watched as she calmly opened a binder in front of her. "Mr. Jennings," she said, sliding a folder across the polished table. "I'd like to present you with what we have marked as Exhibit A. Could you please identify the handwriting on these pages?" I watched Mark's face. He picked up the top page, a photocopy of one of the letters. I saw the first crack in his composure, a flicker of confusion, of alarm. His confident smile faltered. It appears to be my aunt's handwriting," he stammered. "It is," Ms. Davies confirmed. "These are copies of unsent letters your aunt wrote to a deceased friend in the last 2 years of her life. A kind of diary, if you will. I'd like to read a few passages for the record." She didn't wait for his permission. Her voice, clear and dispassionate, cut through the silence. "On June 12th, 2 years ago, your aunt wrote, 'Mark says it's a shame Cynthia is so consumed by her firm that she can't find the time to visit her old aunt. I suppose he's right. It does sting a little. Mr. Jennings, does that sound like you were encouraging your aunt to reach out?'" Mark's face began to flush. She was confused. Her memory was she was paraphrasing. Ms. Davies simply turned a page. On September 3rd, she wrote, Mark was helping me, and he noticed Mother's silver locket is missing. He gently suggested that Cynthia might have borrowed it. I can't imagine she would do such a thing, can I? Mr. Jennings, were you aware that your aunt had, in fact, gifted that locket to Cynthia on her 40th birthday at a party you attended? He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. He looked at his lawyer, who just gave a slight, helpless shake of his head. And finally, Mr. Jennings, Ms. Davies said, her voice dropping slightly, delivering the final blow. 1 week before the will you benefit from was signed, your aunt wrote this. He says I must be strong and protect the family from Cynthia's greed. He is bringing his lawyer tomorrow, a Mr. Hayes, to help me fix the will. But sometimes I feel like a prisoner in my own home. The room was utterly silent. Mark's smooth, confident facade had completely shattered. He was pale, sweating, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. He started to stammer, a pathetic string of denials. That's not true. She was a confused, paranoid old woman. She didn't know what she was saying. This is an invasion of privacy. His voice grew louder, more hysterical, but the words were empty. The truth, in his aunt's own shaky handwriting, had destroyed him. Ms. Davies closed the binder with a soft, final click. No further questions, your witness. Mark's lawyer quickly tried to end the deposition, to stop the bleeding. But before he could, I leaned forward slightly. All the emotion I had been suppressing, I let it drain away, leaving only a cold, quiet calm. I looked across the table, not at the successful man he pretended to be, but at the small, jealous boy he had always been. Why, Mark? I asked, my voice clear and low, not for the court record, but for him. Why did you hate me so much? My question hung in the sterile conference room, a question not of law, but of blood. Mark stared at me, the mask of the devoted nephew finally gone, leaving only a bitter, resentful man. His lawyer, a man who clearly knew his client was self-destructing, immediately tried to intervene. This deposition is over. We're not answering that. But it was too late. My question had unlocked something in Mark, a pressure valve that had been tightening for decades. He waved his lawyer off, a manic energy in his eyes. No, he said, his voice a low snarl. No, I'll answer her. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, his knuckles white. Hate you, Cynthia? Is that what you think this was about? He laughed, a dry, joyless sound that scraped the air. I didn't hate you. I did my duty. That's what you never understood. He was on his feet now, pacing behind his chair, his words spilling out in a torrent of long-simmering resentment. While you were off playing star architect in the city, winning your awards, getting your picture in magazines, who was here? Who was taking Aunt Alina to H? Weekly doctor's appointments. Who was listening to the same stories about the good old days for the 1000th time? Who was changing the light bulbs and fixing the leaky faucet? It was me. I was the one who was here, day in and day out. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You got to escape. You got to have your important modern life. You never had to deal with the obligations, the expectations, the suffocating weight of this family. You were the independent woman, too good for all of us. You'd waltz in at Christmas and Easter, get all the praise for being so brilliant and successful, and then you'd leave. You'd go back to your real life. This was my real life. His voice was rising, cracking with a pathetic self-pity. I earned that inheritance. I earned it with every boring dinner, every pointless errand, every single time I had to smile and nod and pretend I was fascinated. It was supposed to be my payment for a lifetime of service. You did nothing but show up and be impressive. It was never, ever fair. I just sat there, frozen, watching him unravel. My lawyer was silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing for a moment, her eyes wide. So yes, he spat, his face red, flecks of spittle flying from his mouth. I told her the truth about you. The truth she was too sentimental to see, that you were too busy for her, that you looked down on her, that you didn't really care. It wasn't even a lie. I just helped her see what was already there. She needed to protect the family from the daughter who had abandoned it. I helped her do that. It was what she wanted. The words echoed in the quiet room. And in that moment, all the anger I had been carrying for months, the cold, hard fury that had been fueling this entire fight, it just dissolved. It evaporated, leaving nothing behind but a profound, hollow ache. My blind spot, my supreme confidence in my own judgment, had been my inability to see this. I had dismissed him as a harmless, fawning sycophant. I never imagined that beneath his meek exterior was this deep, festering cavern of jealousy. It wasn't a grand conspiracy. It was a small, petty, and deeply pathetic crusade born of his own insecurity. It was never about my aunt's well-being. It was about punishing me for having a life he was too afraid to build for himself. He finally ran out of steam, his tirade ending in a series of ragged breaths. He stood there, panting, his ugly, selfish truth laid bare for the record. His lawyer had his head in his hands. I had come here looking for a monster, a master manipulator who had stolen my aunt's mind. But there was no monster in the room. There was just a small, bitter, and desperately unhappy man who had poisoned a lonely old woman's heart because he couldn't stand the light from someone else's life. The legal fight was over. I knew it in that instant. But the emotional battle, the one I thought I was winning with my righteous anger, had just reached its devastating and empty conclusion. I felt no triumph, only pity. Pity was the last thing I expected to feel. But seeing the small, jealous man behind the monster he'd created, I realized the victory wasn't about the money at all. It was about the truth. And the truth was just sad. After Mark's unraveling at the deposition, the rest of the legal battle was less a fight and more a controlled demolition. His lawyers, who I'm sure were costing him a fortune, tried to file a few more motions. They argued that my aunt's unsent letters were private and inadmissible, that Mark's emotional outburst was the result of aggressive and manipulative questioning. I mean, honestly, the nerve. But it was just noise. The case was over. His confession, every self-pitying and incriminating word of it, had been captured by the court reporter. It was a legal atom bomb, and we all just had to wait for the fallout to settle. The final hearing took place 3 months later in the Suffolk County Probate and Family Court, a grand, imposing building that felt like it was built from the weight of 1,000,000 family secrets. Mark wasn't there. His lawyers were, looking tired and resigned. I sat beside Ms. Davies, my back straight, and I watched the slow, formal dance of the law. The judge was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through everything. She had read the deposition transcripts. She had read my aunt's heartbreaking letters. She had read the will. She didn't waste any time. She looked down from her bench, her gaze resting on Mark's lead attorney. "Counselor," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an authority that filled the cavernous room, "I have reviewed all the submitted materials in this case. The evidence of undue influence exerted by your client, Mr. Jennings, upon his late aunt is not just compelling, it is overwhelming. His actions represent a profound and calculated betrayal of familial trust." She then looked at me. "Therefore, this court finds Th. E. will dated 1 year prior to the deceased's death to be invalid and declares it null and void." It was that simple. A few quiet words, and the hateful document that had turned my life upside down was gone, reduced to a legal fiction. The judge wasn't finished. "Ms. Davies," she asked, "is the court to understand there is a prior, uncontested will on file?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ms. Davies said, rising. "Dated 10 years ago." She produced the document, and the judge reviewed it. After a moment, she looked up. "Then it is the ruling of this court that the estate of Alina Vance shall be settled according to the terms of this prior and valid will." I already knew what it said. I had read it with Ms. Davies weeks ago. It was the will of the aunt I remembered. In it, she left a significant but smaller trust fund to Mark, in recognition of his familial loyalty. The bulk of the estate, the house, the portfolio, the legacy, she left to me. There was no joy in that moment. There was no triumphant fist pump. I didn't feel like I had won a prize. I just felt a quiet sense of order being restored. A deep, profound weariness. A terrible sadness for what it had taken to get here. The legal system, that slow, grinding, and brutal machine, had worked. It had found the truth. Ms. Davies and I walked out of the courthouse and onto the front steps, the sounds of the city rushing back in. The sun was bright, and I had to shield my eyes. "Congratulations, Cynthia," she said, offering me a firm, professional handshake. "You did it." I looked down at the thick folder in my other hand. It was filled with the official court orders, the legal papers that declared me the winner, the rightful heir. I had fought for the truth, and I had won. But standing there on those steps with the whole world moving on around me, I had never felt less like a victor. The cost of this justice, the complete and utter destruction of my family, felt immense. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was a price I would be paying for the rest of my life. For weeks after, I lived in a state of quiet reflection. The calls of congratulations from friends felt distant, like they were happening in someone else's life. They saw a simple headline, "Woman wins back inheritance." They didn't see the wreckage. I had the inheritance, the house, the legal justice I fought for, but I felt hollow. I started spending time at the Beacon Hill brownstone, not living there, but just being there. The house was mine now, a silent, dusty monument to a family that had imploded. I'd walk through the grand, empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the old hardwood floors. This was the prize. This was what it was all for. And all I could feel was the profound, suffocating weight of the ghosts that remained. I told myself I needed to understand what had happened. Not just the legal maneuvering, but the structural failure. I'm an architect. When a building fails, you perform a post-mortem. You find the point of weakness, the design flaw. And as I sat in my aunt's quiet, sunlit study, surrounded by her books and history, I finally forced myself to analyze the one part of the equation I had been avoiding, my own role in the collapse. My blind spot, the flaw in my own design. It was, I realized with a sickening clarity, my pride. My entire life was built on the principle of being strong, of not needing anyone, of seeing a threat coming a mile away. I was the independent survivor. And because Mark had always looked so weak, so harmless and fawning and honestly pathetic, I never saw him as a threat. I didn't respect him enough to even consider him dangerous. I had seen him as wallpaper. Annoying, perhaps, with his endless flattery of a leaner, but ultimately just part of the background. I never imagined that wallpaper could hide a slow, creeping rot that was eating the house from the inside out. He was a termite, and I was an architect so focused on the building's grand foundation that I never thought to check the woodwork. I thought back over the years, and with this new, terrible clarity, I could see the pattern. Every time I had declined a family dinner because of a work deadline, Mark had been there, offering to stay and keep a leaner company. Every time I had a brisk, efficient phone call with my aunt, he was likely there the next day for a long, leisurely tea, listening patiently for hours. I had created a vacuum with my independence, my emotional distance. I didn't do it out of malice. I was just living my life. But my absence had created a space. And Mark, with his simmering resentment and bottomless need for validation, had stepped in and filled it with his poison. It was a bitter pill to swallow. To admit that my own strength, the very thing I was most proud of, had also been my greatest vulnerability. I was so confident in my ability to handle any overt attack that I was completely unprepared for the insidious nature of quiet manipulation. I had learned a brutal lesson. Strength that doesn't make room for connection is just another form of isolation. I sat there in my aunt's priceless antique chair, looking out at the manicured garden, and I felt a loneliness so profound it was a physical ache. I had won. I was the sole heir to a great fortune. I had proven I was right, and I had exposed Mark for the liar he was, and I had never felt more alone. The victory felt empty because the prize was just things. Beautiful, expensive, historic things, but they were cold comfort. They couldn't fix the gaping hole where my family used to be. The legal battle was over, but as I sat there, surrounded by the spoils of a war I never wanted to fight, I realized the true challenge was just beginning. Justice isn't just about winning. It's about what you do after you've won. I looked at the vast fortune my aunt had left, a legacy now tainted by betrayal and legal fees. What was I supposed to do with all of this? The answer came to me not in a flash, but as a slow, quiet dawn. My first practical instinct as an architect of my own life was simply to absorb it. Sell the house, liquidate the assets, and hire the best wealth manager in Boston to make the numbers grow even bigger. It was the logical thing to do. It was the independent survivor thing to do. I even took the first steps, meeting with a man in a slick suit who talked about portfolios and long-term growth. But the entire conversation felt hollow, meaningless. To simply add a leaner's fortune to my own felt like a sterile and empty end to such a painful chapter. It felt like letting Mark win, in a way. His fight was about the money. If my victory was only about the money, too, then what was the point? A few weeks later, I was back in my own office, staring at the blueprints for the new public library. I was thinking about structure, about how a building's purpose is to serve and protect the people inside it. My eyes drifted to the corner of my desk where a thick, red folder sat. It was the final bill from my lawyer, Helen Davies. The number was astronomical. I had been able to afford it. I had the resources to hire the best, to fight a long and brutal war. But what about the others? What about the thousands of other Eliners out there? The elderly men and women, isolated and vulnerable, being quietly manipulated by a smiling nephew, a helpful caregiver, or their own children. The ones who didn't have a niece with the financial means and the stubborn will to fight for them. Who fought for them? The answer dawned on me with the clear, simple logic of a perfect blueprint. I wasn't just an architect of buildings. I could be an architect of something more. The next day, I called Helen Davies. "I have a new project for you," I said. "But this time, I'm the client in a different way. I want to build something." I didn't keep the house. I kept a few of my aunt's favorite paintings, her collection of first edition novels, and the box of letters. The rest, the antique furniture, the silver, the priceless objects, we sold at auction. With the proceeds from the house and the estate, I created the Aliner Foundation. I took back my aunt's name, reclaiming it from the ugly narrative Mark had tried to create, and turned it into a symbol of protection. The Foundation's mission is simple and clear: to provide free and low-cost legal aid to the elderly who are victims of financial exploitation and undue influence. We're a small operation for now, tucked away in a modest but bright office downtown. But we are a fortress. A fortress built not of brick and mortar, but of legal protection for the most vulnerable. My life is different now. I still run my firm, but I spend half my week here at the Foundation. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a good project manager. I know how to build a team, how to manage a budget, and most importantly, I know how to listen. The story ends here, I suppose, but it's also a beginning. This morning, I sat in our small conference room with a new client, a lovely woman named Rose, whose hands trembled as she told a story that was terrifyingly similar to my own. Her son had been convincing her that she was getting forgetful, trying to get her to sign over her house. When she finished, there were tears in her eyes. "I just feel so foolish," she whispered. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "You are not foolish," I said. "You were trusting. There is a difference." I then walked her over and introduced her to one of our young, brilliant lawyers, a woman with the same fire in her eyes that Helen Davies has. As I watched them start to talk, to build a case, to fight back, I felt a sense of peace that no amount of money could ever buy. I had fought for justice and won a fortune, but the real victory wasn't in the inheritance I received. It was in turning a legacy of pain into a legacy of hope. I had found my own path to justice, not in the money I won, but in the help I could now give. My story began with a sentence in a will that was designed to erase me. It was a brutal reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those closest to us, hidden behind smiles and a false sense of duty. The legal battle that followed was about fighting for the truth, but the real victory wasn't the moment the judge read the verdict. The real victory came in the quiet moments after, in deciding what justice truly means. It's not always about what you get back. Sometimes, it's about what you choose to build from the rubble. This journey taught me that your legacy isn't just what you are given. It's defined by what you do with it, how you can turn a private pain into a public purpose. Perhaps your own battle wasn't in a courtroom. Maybe it was a quiet struggle for respect, a fight to be heard, or a moment you had to stand up for what was right, even when it was the hardest thing to do. If you have a story about fighting for your own truth, I invite you to share your experience in the comments below. Let's build a community that reminds each other that we are not alone in our fights. If you believe that it's possible to turn our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths, please give this video a like. And to hear more stories about the long, hard-fought path to justice and resilience, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.